Washington, where I am, New York, Massachusetts, Nebraska, Florida, to name some of them. And we work on the state level so that we can advocate for policies that are shaped based on that state's political landscape. You can go to the next slide. And that kind of leads me into why we partner with CCL, is because we hope that by building the momentum state by state for climate policy, we can support federal change with laws that would impact us on a national level, like the Energy Innovation Act. So we've partnered with CCL multiple times for lobby days and trainings and conferences, and we work with them to support bold action like the Energy Innovation Act, because young people really need wide, comprehensive climate policy now to protect our future. So this is my first time doing anything with CCL, but my coworkers Eben and Stephen, who are in that photo right there, have talked to me a lot about how impactful working with CCL has been for them, because it really taught them about the importance of policy and advocacy for their futures. And now they are on staff with us and organize high school and college students. So you can go to the next slide. So everyone here knows that youth are obviously important, but I really want to stress the fact that youth are specifically important when talking about climate change, because anytime we're talking about a problem, decisions should be made by the groups that are the most impacted by that problem. But sadly, youth are typically left out of the conversation because youth are really not taken seriously, especially when it comes to policy. So that's why it's so important that CCL supports us and brings us into the conversation, and created a whole track today to talk about the importance that youth bring to this movement. Another thing is that youth have the vision and the boldness that is needed to tackle something as big as climate change. You can go forward. So our work looks like a lot of field programs. We have a fellowship program. That's a picture at the bottom of our fellows last year who participate in climate justice summits, where we host workshops with partner organizations to train young people. We have lobby days and listening sessions. That picture on the left is our fellows with our Governor Jay Inslee. On the right, that's some of our student leaders meeting with Senator Mona Das in Washington. And yeah, so those are our four main things that we do: are the fellowship program, our climate justice summits, lobby days, and listening sessions. So the policies that we advocate for, basically before every legislative session in Washington and in the other states we work in, we talk with our youth to analyze the policies that are on the table to see if they meet our three criteria. One being that they have to be science-based. We don't want to be working with science that was published in the 90s, that is now out of date and not as bold as we need. It also has to be equitable. Like I mentioned earlier, the groups that are most impacted by the issue have got to have a say in the solution. And for us, that means partnering with and uplifting the voices of those who are most impacted. So one of those groups is young people, but it's also low-income groups, labor communities, Black and Indigenous groups, farm workers, people who are experiencing homelessness. Our solutions really have got to benefit the groups that have been the most negatively impacted by climate change. And they have to be bold. That's the strength that young people bring to this movement, is that we have big ideas that we can bring to the table, and something as large as climate change is going to have to be tackled in a bold way. So state level policy is on the next slide. And again, we work on the state level policy because every political landscape is so different. That picture on the bottom shows that we have a Democratic supermajority in Washington state, meaning Democrats run our Senate, our House of Representatives, and our governor's office. That doesn't mean that Democrats are necessarily climate champions or that Republicans can't be, but it helps us shape our strategy, because what work I'm doing looks a lot different than my coworker Stephen, who is organizing in a state like Nebraska. Can go to the next slide. So again, before every legislative session, we talk with our youth to decide what our priorities are going to be for that session. So this past year, these are the bills that we advocated for. I've done links because I could talk about each of these all day, honestly. So if you want to read more about each one, you can visit those links. But we were pushing for a climate emergency declaration, climate pollution limits, a clean fuel standard, and transportation for all. And unfortunately, the only one that we got was the climate pollution limits. So you can go to the next slide. And that was a really huge win for us and very exciting, because basically it updated the climate pollution limits that hadn't been touched since 2008 in our state. And like I said earlier, we have to be working with up-to-date science. So that is a huge win, but unfortunately it is not enough, because basically it's just a goal that is set by the state to say, we hope that we are net zero by 2050 without any actual consequences for if we do not hit that goal. But it does set a framework that we can work within this upcoming year to actually pass policies we can implement to help us reach that goal. So you can go to the next slide. So this year we are planning on, oh, sorry, next slide. So this year we're planning on advocating for some kind of Green New Deal, which you've probably heard of on the national level. It was introduced by the Sunrise Movement and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and that's on the federal level. And we are not, too confident that with our current administration, that is likely to pass. And so we're thinking that we can take it on a state level. So it's a Green New Deal for the Evergreen State, which is Washington State. And basically a Green New Deal is a set of comprehensive policies to address climate change and the areas it impacts, which include housing, health, education, racial justice, and labor. And so right now what we're doing is we are asking for input from our youth leaders to see what they would like to be part of that platform. So you can go to the next slide. So we have been hosting listening sessions, and we have been sending around a survey to people under 30 around Washington State to hear from them, what are you most excited about seeing as part of a Green New Deal for the Evergreen State? So these have been conversations we've been hosting where we hear from young people, how has climate change impacted your life already, your community already? And for you, what do you feel like would be a good solution to that? And so over the summer, we're hosting these listening sessions and passing around this survey, and we are looking at that data, and that is going to help us bring results to tables when discussing policy. We're going to be able to go to those tables and say, here's what youth are saying that they want. Here's what we want to be working on this year. So you can go to the next slide. So the results that we have found so far are three major things. First, that youth feel that the main people that are responsible for climate pollution is corporate polluters, and politicians not acting bold enough are the main things standing in our way to solving climate change. Especially in Washington State, we have some of the world's biggest polluters, huge corporations like Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, Boeing, but we have the most regressive tax system in the country, meaning that they don't pay taxes. So they are, in our state and profiting in our state, making huge amounts of money, but not actually, and polluting in our state, but not actually giving anything back to the state or helping us invest in solutions to that. And youth know that climate change is an intersectional issue, so we need comprehensive policy to address it, which is why a Green New Deal is so important. We have to be addressing race and income and education and healthcare as we are looking at this. And therefore, the last result is that youth really want solutions that dismantle those oppressive systems through investment, especially with the pandemic we're experiencing right now. Washington State is at a minimum going to take a $7 billion hit to our economy, which means that we're expecting budget cuts across the board in this upcoming legislative session. But what young people want right now are investments and not cuts. And that means that we need some form of revenue so that we can actually be investing in transportation, healthcare, education. And so that is why it seems like right now what we are hearing from our youth is that we need to take a serious look at our tax code, and we need to look at putting a price on carbon. You can go to the next slide. And so this year we're going to continue doing those listening sessions and hearing more from youth, getting them involved. But especially in Olympia, Washington, and in any capital across the country, the paid lobbyists who are there, who are representing Starbucks, Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon, they are far overrepresented because they have the time and the resources and the money to be there. Young people do not have that, and that's why this work is so important, of making sure that we are plugging young people into the political system. We are getting them down to the Capitol to talk to their elected officials and remind their elected officials that they work for us, that they represent us, and they have got to protect our right to a livable future. And their main job is not to protect the profit of a few corporations in our state. And again, we don't need to be policy experts as young people. A lot of young people are afraid to get involved in the political process because it's intimidating and we are often not welcome at tables when it comes to policy, but we have the vision and the boldness that is needed to tackle this problem. And so that is why we're really trying to put our foot in the door and get into those tables to influence the conversation and push major nonprofit groups and policy advocates to think bigger. You can go to the next slide. So just to wrap up, we know that youth are going to be super critical this year, especially because it's a huge election year, and we right now only have 10 years to act boldly before we are hit by catastrophic and irreversible impacts of climate change. We're the generations that are most impacted by climate, and so we've got to be the ones leading the movement to end it. And I think that might be the last slide. Yes, so there's 5 minutes left, so I wanted to save some time for questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions that came in. So someone asked, how do you determine which youth under 30 to invite? Can they contact you to participate?
Yes, and actually, if you could pull up, there's one slide after this, and it has my email on it. So I am specifically in Washington State, and we want to hear from anybody under 30 in Washington State to take our survey and to attend our listening sessions. But anybody under 30 in any of the states that we work in, reach out to me and I can send those people to my coworkers in other states, because we need to be hearing from every single young person. They all bring different perspectives, and yeah, so really there's no restriction other than under 30 basically.
Excellent. We've got, what are you doing to train and encourage young people to speak with local elected officials while they are in district?
Oh yeah, so right now the Washington State Legislature is not in session, so they are in district right now, and we've been setting up virtual meetings since obviously during the pandemic we can't physically be meeting with them. But most young people don't even know the difference between their Congress people and their state level elected officials. And so a huge part of our work is education and telling them, you know, this is the district you live in. Most people don't even know that. They don't know the names of their elected officials, and then helping them, training them on how to lobby and how to build relationships with those people so that they can confidently meet with their elected officials and feel empowered to say, you work for me, and here's what me and the young people that live in your district want to see you work on this legislative session.
Great. And then along similar lines, we have a question. How do you motivate the kids to not lose hope when working on something that is long-term and does not provide immediate results?
That is something I struggle with every day, and I also struggle with as a young person. We have allotted times for our weekly meetings, and we have had in our listening sessions sort of like group therapy, because it's such a huge problem that is so sort of nebulous that it can feel really hopeless. And for a young person who has school and work to have to try and think about stopping, you know, the end of the world from happening is a lot, and we don't want young people to feel burned out. And so a huge part of it is also, you know, building relationships between young people so that we can empower each other and comfort each other through it, and providing resources for them to, you know, see a professional to talk about it. I know that a lot of young people we've talked to in the survey, one of our questions is, how often do you experience climate-related anxiety? And it's over 90% of people said that they experience it often. And more therapists are seeing young people coming in and not knowing how to handle the stress of that. So not a great answer, but it's kind of something we're figuring out as we go.
We've got another question. How are you organizing the listening sessions? Are they in schools? Are they in libraries? How are they happening? And how are the surveys being distributed, and how are you finding respondents?
Okay, I have 2 minutes, so I'm gonna try and go fast. But Okay, so the listening sessions are relatively new. We started that on Earth Day, and that was during the pandemic. And so far they have all been virtual. And so we asked our fellows to share it with their friends and their classmates. And those are 1 hour long listening sessions. We've had 4 of them so far, and we're in between programs right now. So we're in the process of organizing more. And in terms of the survey, that is a Google form that is online because a lot of young people don't have the time to attend a listening session, but we still want to be able to hear from them. And so it's a form that basically, and if you email me, I have that survey that I can share with you, and I'd love it if you know young people in Washington to share it with them. But that is an ongoing project, is making sure that we are doing effective enough outreach to make sure that we are getting answers from every single legislative district, so that when we have those meetings with elected officials, we can say, we've had 20 youth from your district fill out this survey, and 90% of them say that they want to see you work on, you know, pricing pollution. Okay, 30 seconds.
We have a quick follow-up for those surveys. How did you get permission, and what grade did you start with?
The grade is literally anybody under 30. So it ranges, the youngest person we've had take it is like 6 years old. And how do we get permission? I mean, we just send them to anybody who would be interested in taking them. So I'm not quite sure, but I could talk about this for like hours. So if anybody is interested in following up with me, I'm happy to have phone calls with you or emails or video chats. So please feel free to email me at emily@ourclimate.us. And before I go, I just want to say thank you to CCL for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.